Hello, biologists. Michelle Glass here, and our job here is to finish up Lab 7 by looking at the human reproductive system. So let us get started. As we talk about the human reproductive system, we have three important functions for this body system. Number one would be the production of special types of cells that we refer to as gametes. You should have heard about these cells in your Biology 1 course. So your gametes can either be sperm or spermatozoa or egg cells or oocytes. And these are your haploid cells that come together to form the next generation. So another important function of the human reproductive system is the development and support of that embryo, that fetus, which is about 8 weeks of gestational development, and then also support of that infant after birth. And then a third important function of the human reproductive system is the development and maintenance of what we describe as secondary sex characteristics. And these characteristics are determined by the presence of the sex hormones, either testosterone or estrogen. So depending on which type of sex hormone is present in your body, you will see a difference in secondary sex characteristics. So with testosterone, we see fat distribution is more in the abdominal region. We see a longer period of time for bone elongation. And so typically individuals with testosterone will be taller. We also see testosterone aids in muscular development. We see that testosterone will trigger more hair growth on face, chest, back, and arms and legs. With estrogen, we see that fat distribution is more in the hip area. We will see a shorter period for bone growth, and so these individuals are typically shorter. And we see estrogen production results in less of that overall body hairiness. So we don't see as much darkly pigmented hair on face, chest, arms, and we will see, some extent on legs and arms, but not quite as much as for bodies with a lot of testosterone. When we talk about human reproductive system organs and structures, we see that you will have a set of gonads. This can be either testes or ovaries, and the gonad is going to be the location for the production of those sex cells that we mentioned above, the sperm cell or egg cell. And we see also that the gonad is really the location for sex hormone production. So if your body is producing testosterone and testes, or if your body is producing estrogen and ovaries. And then there's a collection of internal anatomy as well. So we'll see lots of different types of glands that are associated with the reproductive system. The uterus would be involved here as an internal anatomical structure. And then we have, of course, the external genitalia or external anatomy, and this would include either the penis or the vulva. As we talk about human reproductive system, it is important to pay attention to how biological sex is determined, or in a lot of cases, we can talk about this as being an assignment. When we look at humans, we see that sex is determined by chromosomes, sex hormones, and reproductive anatomy. Reproductive anatomy, remember, includes both internal and external structures. So when we talk about chromosomes, we see that we have a typical pattern of either being XX or XY, but there are variations that exist here. We also see that there's about 25 different genes that are involved. So some of these are located on the Y chromosome, for instance, the SRY, and some of these are located on other chromosomes. And so depending on the combination of genes and chromosomes that your body has, that might influence the way that your reproductive anatomy has developed, or that might influence the type of hormones that you're producing. Sex hormones, remember, are going to be very much involved in those secondary sex characteristics. And so when we talk about sex hormones determining sex, we are talking, remember, about estrogen and testosterone. So we're talking about two things, both what type of hormones your body is producing, but also what type of hormones your body can hear. And I'm talking about it in that sense because hormones are chemical messengers, and they travel through your body and your bloodstream, and different cells respond to different hormones, and it's based on their submembrane receptor. So if your body is making the hormone estrogen, but not the receptor for estrogen, then even if your body is producing estrogen, you may not have secondary sex characteristics that are associated with estrogen production, because your cells may not be responding or may not be hearing that estrogen. So we can think of it in those lines. And then, of course, the reproductive anatomy, which includes, remember, both internal and external genitalia. So when we talk about sex assignment, typically what's happening there is either during gestation, you might have an ultrasound, and the genitals are seen during the ultrasound, and so doctor says, oh, you're having a boy, you're having a girl. And so that's a very simplistic view, because that's based on just the visible external genitalia. And then, of course, at birth, we have the same kind of assignment happening. So again, looking at the visible external genitalia, whether we see infant's penis or vulva, then doctor might say, oh, you have a boy, you have a girl. When we talk about biological sex, we do often live in a binary world of either you're female or you're male. The reality is that it's super complicated, and it's way more complicated than the simplistic view of being either female or male. So there's also what we can collectively describe as intersex. And this is a huge umbrella term. There's lots of different ways of being intersex. Remember, because we're looking at the combination of chromosome and gene production, the sex hormone productions and the receptors that go along with it, as well as both internal and external reproductive anatomy. And even though this is a pretty rare condition for humans, we do see that about 1% of the human population is intersex. And so right now, we have about 7.9 billion humans on our planet. So if you do the quick math there, that gives us about 79 million people who are intersex. So even though this is a small percentage, that's still quite a lot of individuals. So I will link in the video description an article if you're interested that gives a little bit more information on what is intersex. This idea of having a complicated biological sex is not unique to humans. So we do see this showing up in other parts of the animal kingdom. So this is an example in a cardinal. So in a lot of our birds, you have very we would call it dimorphic, meaning you have a very obvious male bird and a very obvious female bird, right? So we know that the male cardinals have that bright red color, and the female cardinal is more blending in with the environment so that she can sit on the nest and not be as visible. In this particular case, we see that this individual cardinal has half of the body with male genetics and the other half of the body with female genetics, and it's basically down the line. And so this individual is having secondary sex characteristics, half of the body male and half of the body female. So in this case, we call it again andromorph rather than intersex, but it is the same sort of idea. The last thing I want to mention here before we get into our labeling is gender. So sometimes there's a confusion that gender and sex are the same thing. In fact, I was confused about this for a very long time. I was pretty much taught that this is the synonyms, and that's not the case. So when we talk about gender, gender is different from sex, and sex can be part of this conversation, but it's not the full story. And it's a quite another complicated topic of conversation. So there are 3 different dimensions of gender. So one of the dimensions of gender is body. So that's going back to our conversation about sex, looking at those secondary sex characteristics as well as internal and external genitalia. So that's going to be part of our understanding of gender, because remember, we look at those genitals on our infants and we say, oh, you're a boy, and then we raise up that kid as our idea of a boy, and we might look and see the vulva and say, oh, you're a girl, and then raise up that individual with our idea of what it means to be a girl. So that's the influence of the body. Identity is another important dimension of gender, and this is a very internal sense. This is how we see ourselves. And so this is a very unique, individualistic sort of component of gender. And then the third dimension is expression. And this is more like how we present our gender out into the world. So this includes things like our clothing and the way that we our voice and our mannerisms and our gender roles and maybe our roles that we pick or follow for ourselves. So this is a very complicated piece. If this is a topic of interest to you, genderspectrum.org is a great resource. So I'll link to that one in the video description as well. So we are ready now to start labeling. So let us pull out that diagram and get started here. Okay, taking a look at this particular cut of the human pelvis, we can pick out first our urinary structures. So right here is the urinary bladder, and this opening right here, this passageway, is the urethra. So in this particular case, we do see that the urinary system and reproductive systems are separate. Up here, we see the gonad, which is called the ovary. And then we have a tube called the uterine tube. This has several names. It's also referred to as the oviduct or fallopian tube. The uterine tube will carry that developing embryo actually to the uterus. We have here the birth canal called the vagina, and then we have at the very top of that vagina, or like the base of the uterus or neck of the uterus, we have what's called the cervix. This little white, let me turn on my laser. This little white right here is a piece to the model where you can like attach another piece with it. So that's not actually our anatomical structure. We have right here the rectum. And then we can see part of the external genitalia. So you're looking here at a diagram of half of the vulva, and we're going to have a labia My eraser's not working. Labia, which means lip, minora, and then labia majora. So that is given us both the inner or smaller lip and the outer or larger lip to the vulva. And then this tissue right here, you're seeing just a small portion of the erectile excitable tissue called the clitoris. Okay, so when we talk about the external genitalia, you'll see there is some excitable erectile tissue in both the penis and the vagina. And so these are the structures that we can label on this particular image. If we look at the other diagram here, we can again pick out the urinary bladder, which remember is storing the urine. And then here we see this opening as the urethra. So in this case, we're looking at, I can label it here. Can't really see that label, so I'll do my line. We're looking at a urinary and reproductive system that is combined. Here we have the rectum, okay? And right here at the tip of the penis, we have the external urethral opening. Looking at the base of the bladder right here, we have the gland called prostate. And looking here, let me change my color. We have the gonad, the testis is the plural form. Sitting right on top of the testis, we have the epididymis. This whole gonad is kept at a cooler temperature outside of the pelvic cavity, and a tissue called the scrotum, and an organ called the scrotum. Now coming up through this, you would have a tube, and I think we're seeing the other side of it right here. This is called the Vas Deferens. So it would be, I'm going to erase that drawing. It would be coming up out of the epididymis. You might want to take a look at your textbook to find a better diagram there. Your sheet in your lab asks you to label the seminal vesicles, which would be located kind of in this area here, but I don't clearly see it on our photo, so I'm not going to ask you to label that. Okay, that should be it for Lab 7. So you do want to take some time to take your weekly quiz. If you have any questions, let me know. And as always, take care of yourselves and each other.